It is the
Meine
evening of
Herren, die
April
Situation
28,
ist kritisch.
1945,
Wir müssen
and
sofort
beneath the
handeln.
shattered streets
Hier
of
ist der
Berlin,
Plan.
the air feels unnaturally still. Above ground, Soviet artillery pounds what remains of the German capital with relentless precision, each explosion sending dust cascading from cracked concrete ceilings deep below. The city trembles. Electric lights flicker inside a reinforced bunker buried beneath the Reich Chancellery gardens, where maps lie scattered across heavy wooden tables, already made obsolete by events unfolding beyond the walls. Telephone lines buzz with desperate reports. Officers move quietly through narrow corridors, their boots echoing against bare floors, careful not to disturb the silence hanging over rooms where the future of the Third Reich is collapsing by the hour. Adolf Hitler waits inside his private quarters, physically diminished after years of war. His left hand trembles noticeably, and those around him later recall a leader whose confidence has been replaced by exhaustion, suspicion, and anger. Outside, smoke drifts across the ruins of Berlin, while Soviet soldiers advance street by street through broken buildings and cratered avenues. Every passing hour narrows the territory still under German control. The empire that once stretched from the Atlantic coast to the outskirts of Moscow has contracted to a few isolated pockets of resistance. Yet within these underground chambers, loyalty remains the currency on which survival depends. At least, that is what Hitler still believes. Then comes the message. It is not news of another defeated army, nor another city lost to Allied forces. Those disasters have become almost routine. Instead, according to surviving records from those present in the bunker, Hitler is handed reports claiming that the man he had trusted more than almost anyone else has secretly attempted to negotiate with the Western Allies. Heinrich Himmler, Reichsführer SS, commander of one of the most powerful organizations in Nazi Germany, and for years among Hitler's closest political allies, is accused of seeking peace without the Führer's knowledge or permission. The revelation strikes with extraordinary force. Witnesses later described Hitler erupting in fury unlike anything they had previously seen during those final days. Military defeat could be blamed on overwhelming enemy strength. Personal betrayal was something else entirely. In that moment, the walls of the bunker seem to close in. Maps, armies, and grand strategies suddenly become secondary to a far more personal catastrophe. Hitler had spent years constructing a regime founded on absolute obedience, demanding unwavering loyalty from everyone around him. Now, as defeat becomes unavoidable, even the architect of the SS appears to have concluded that the war cannot be won. Whether Himmler hoped to save Germany, preserve part of the Nazi state, protect himself from inevitable prosecution, or simply secure better surrender terms remains the subject of historical debate. Historians continue to disagree over his precise intentions. What remains beyond serious dispute is that his secret diplomacy shattered whatever trust still existed at the center of Hitler's collapsing dictatorship. For millions beyond Berlin, the revelation changes little. Allied armies continue advancing. Soviet troops tighten their grip on the capital. Civilians struggle to survive amid destruction, unlike anything Europe has witnessed before. Yet inside the bunker, this single act carries enormous emotional weight. Hitler no longer sees merely a military defeat. He believes himself surrounded by treachery. The inner circle that had once appeared unbreakable is disintegrating under the pressure of inevitable collapse. Few moments better capture the final days of the Third Reich than this. Not simply because an empire is ending, but because the relationships that sustained it are falling apart at precisely the moment they are needed most. To understand why Heinrich Himmler possessed the power to shake Hitler so profoundly, it is necessary to travel back more than 2 decades, long before Berlin became a battlefield and long before Europe descended into global war. When Adolf Hitler emerged as a prominent political figure during the turbulent years following the First World War, Germany remained scarred by defeat, revolution, and economic instability. The Treaty of Versailles imposed territorial losses, military restrictions, and heavy reparations that fueled widespread resentment across much of German society. Hyperinflation devastated savings in 1923, while political violence between extremist groups became a common feature of public life. These conditions did not make Nazi success inevitable, but they created an environment in which radical promises attracted increasing attention. Among the many individuals drawn towards Hitler's growing movement was Heinrich Himmler. Born in Munich on October 7, 1900, Himmler came from a respectable middle-class Catholic family. His father worked as a schoolmaster, and unlike many future Nazi leaders, Himmler possessed neither a distinguished military record nor an especially charismatic personality. During the closing months of the First World War, he trained as an officer cadet, yet the armistice arrived before he saw combat. The disappointment appears to have left a lasting impression, although there is no surviving evidence suggesting that this experience alone determined his later political choices. After the war, Himmler studied agriculture at the Technical University of Munich. Those who encountered him during these years often described a quiet, disciplined young man with an intense interest in organization and administration. He lacked the theatrical speaking style of Joseph Goebbels and the military reputation of Hermann Göring. His strengths lay elsewhere. He displayed extraordinary patience, meticulous attention to paperwork, and an almost obsessive commitment to bureaucratic efficiency. These qualities would later become central to the machinery of Nazi rule. He joined the Nazi Party in 1923, becoming involved in political activities during a period when the movement remained relatively small. That same year, he participated in the failed Beer Hall Putsch, although only in a minor capacity. The attempted coup collapsed within hours, Hitler was imprisoned, and many observers believed the movement finished. Records suggest Himmler remained loyal throughout these difficult years, continuing organizational work while the party slowly rebuilt itself after its temporary ban. As the Nazi Party expanded during the late 1920s, Hitler increasingly recognized the value of dependable administrators alongside gifted propagandists and political campaigners. Loyalty mattered enormously. Hitler frequently rewarded individuals who demonstrated unwavering personal commitment rather than independent initiative. Himmler excelled within precisely this system. He rarely challenged orders, embraced ideological discipline, and devoted himself completely to strengthening the organization. The turning point came in January 1929, when Hitler appointed Himmler as Reichsführer SS. At the time, the Schutzstaffel, or SS, remained a comparatively small organization numbering fewer than 300 men. Its original purpose was straightforward: to serve as Hitler's personal bodyguard and provide security at party events. Few could have imagined that this modest force would evolve into one of history's most powerful and feared institutions. The task before Himmler appeared almost impossible. The Nazi Party already possessed the much larger Sturmabteilung, or SA, whose hundreds of thousands of members dominated political confrontations on Germany's streets. Compared with the SS seemed insignificant. Yet Himmler believed quality would ultimately matter more than quantity. Rather than building another mass organization, he sought an elite corps defined by strict selection standards, absolute loyalty, and ideological commitment. It was a decision that would reshape the future of Nazi Germany in ways almost no one could yet foresee. For more incredible true stories from World War II, carefully researched and brought to life, subscribe to the channel and never miss a new documentary. The transformation of the SS did not happen overnight. It emerged through relentless organization, careful recruitment, and a bureaucracy that expanded almost invisibly before revealing its true scale. Himmler approached administration with the precision of an agricultural planner. Every application was examined, every promotion documented, every branch assigned a distinct purpose. What had begun as a small bodyguard unit steadily evolved into an organization that reached into almost every aspect of life within Nazi Germany. Adolf Hitler valued this methodical approach because it complemented his own style of leadership. He frequently encouraged competition between rival organizations, allowing overlapping responsibilities to create a system in which ambitious subordinates competed for his approval. Himmler proved particularly adept at navigating this environment. Rather than challenging other powerful figures directly, he gradually accumulated authority through persistence, convincing Hitler that the SS alone possessed the discipline and ideological commitment required to safeguard the regime. The decisive moment came during the Night of the Long Knives between June 30th and July 2nd, 1934. By then, the leadership of the SA under Ernst Röhm had become a growing source of concern for Hitler and other senior Nazis. Röhm commanded a force numbering in the millions, dwarfing Germany's still limited armed forces, and his political ambitions alarmed both conservative supporters and military leaders. Acting on intelligence reports, personal suspicions, and political calculations that historians continue to examine in detail, Hitler ordered a sweeping purge of perceived opponents. The SS played a central role in carrying out the arrests and executions. Exact numbers remain uncertain, but modern historical research indicates that at least 85 people were killed, while some estimates place the true figure considerably higher. Whatever the precise total, the consequences were unmistakable. Rome was dead. The SA's influence was broken. In the aftermath, the SS emerged as an independent organization directly responsible to Hitler himself. Himmler's position was transformed almost overnight. Over the following years, his authority expanded with remarkable speed. The SS absorbed responsibilities that stretched far beyond personal security. It developed its own military formations, intelligence networks, and administrative departments. It assumed increasing control over the police apparatus after Himmler became chief of the German police in 1936, effectively merging political policing with SS leadership while maintaining formal links to the Interior Ministry. The result was an unprecedented concentration of power. Within this structure operated the Gestapo, Germany's secret state police, and the Kriminalpolizei, responsible for criminal investigations. Above them sat the Reich Main Security Office, established in 1939 under Reinhard Heydrich. This organization coordinated intelligence gathering, security operations, and political repression across territories controlled by Nazi Germany. It employed thousands of officials, analysts, investigators, and administrators whose paperwork became as essential to the regime as its weapons. Files, reports, and transport schedules formed the skeleton upon which much of the Nazi state's machinery depended. To an ordinary observer, the bureaucracy might have appeared almost mundane. Clerks stamped documents, typists prepared orders, railway officials coordinated trains. Yet historians have repeatedly demonstrated that these seemingly ordinary administrative processes became integral to implementing policies of persecution, deportation, and mass murder. The Holocaust did not depend solely upon armed men in uniform. It also relied upon an enormous administrative system capable of organizing people, resources, and transport across an occupied continent. As the Second World War began with Germany's invasion of Poland on September 1, 1939, the SS accompanied the advancing Wehrmacht in specialized formations known as the Einsatzgruppen. According to wartime records and extensive post-war investigations, these mobile killing units followed behind frontline troops, targeting political officials, intellectuals, and increasingly, Jewish communities. Their activities escalated dramatically following the invasion of the Soviet Union in June 1941, where mass shootings claimed hundreds of thousands of lives. Historians continue refining casualty estimates, but there is broad agreement that more than 1 million people were murdered by these units during the war. Meanwhile, the concentration camp system expanded into a vast network stretching across occupied Europe. Camps such as Dachau, Sachsenhausen, Buchenwald, Ravensbrück, and Auschwitz evolved for differing purposes, including imprisonment, forced labor, and, in some locations, systematic extermination. Administrative records reveal extraordinary attention to logistics, construction, labor allocation, and transportation. The scale remains difficult to comprehend. Millions passed through this system under SS authority, and countless lives were destroyed. Although Himmler occupied the highest position within this structure, historians continue to debate the precise balance between his personal direction and the initiatives of subordinate officials. Surviving documentation shows him issuing broad ideological instructions, approving organizational expansion, and receiving detailed reports. It also reveals that many operational decisions were implemented through an extensive hierarchy of commanders and administrators. What is beyond dispute is that the SS became one of the principal instruments through which Nazi racial policy and political repression were enforced. Alongside these security responsibilities, Himmler oversaw the growth of the Waffen-SS, the military branch of the organization. Initially conceived as a relatively small armed formation distinct from the regular army, it expanded dramatically during the war. By 1944, the Waffen-SS comprised approximately 38 divisions, though their strength and quality varied considerably. Exact personnel totals remain uncertain because of fluctuating recruitment and battlefield losses, but historians generally estimate that around 900,000 men served in the Waffen-SS over the course of the conflict. Its equipment often matched that of the Wehrmacht, including Panther and Tiger tanks in elite armored divisions, self-propelled artillery, armored personnel carriers, and modern infantry weapons. Some formations, such as the 1st SS Panzer Division Leibstandarte SS Adolf Hitler and the 12th SS Panzer Division Hitlerjugend, acquired reputations for fierce battlefield performance. Others suffered from inadequate training, shortages of experienced officers, or poor combat effectiveness, particularly during the final year of the war when Germany's industrial capacity was collapsing under Allied bombing and territorial losses. The Waffen-SS attracted volunteers from across occupied Europe, as well as conscripts and foreign recruits whose motivations differed widely. Some joined for ideological reasons. Others enlisted because of anti-Soviet sentiment, coercion, or local political circumstances. Historians caution against treating these formations as a single, uniform force. Their combat records varied enormously, as did their involvement in documented war crimes. Throughout these years, Hitler appeared to regard Himmler as one of the regime's most dependable lieutenants. Unlike Hermann Göring, whose influence declined after repeated military disappointments, or Joseph Goebbels, whose talents lay primarily in propaganda, Himmler projected unwavering diligence. He seldom sought public acclaim. Instead, he cultivated the image of an administrator whose loyalty never faltered. It was precisely this reputation that made the events of 1945 so astonishing. After more than a decade spent building one of the most powerful organizations in Nazi Germany, the man who had demanded absolute obedience from millions would soon face a decision that, in Hitler's eyes, amounted to the ultimate act of betrayal. For more incredible true stories from World War II, carefully researched and brought to life, subscribe to the channel and never miss a new documentary. By the opening months of 1945, the war had entered its final and most desperate phase. Germany's strategic position had become almost hopeless. In the east, the Soviet Vistula-Oder offensive, launched on January 12th, tore through weakened German defenses with astonishing speed. Within weeks, Red Army formations had advanced hundreds of kilometers, crossing rivers that German planners had once hoped would serve as natural barriers. Refugees flooded westward in freezing winter conditions, filling roads with horse-drawn carts, bicycles, and exhausted families carrying what little they could save. According to wartime accounts, entire communities abandoned their homes in fear of the advancing front, creating scenes of chaos that stretched for miles. Meanwhile, in the West, British, American, and Canadian forces continued their relentless advance following the failure of Germany's Ardennes offensive. Cities that had once formed the industrial heart of the Reich were either occupied or subjected to sustained aerial bombardment. Coal production had fallen sharply. Railway networks were repeatedly disrupted. Fuel shortages crippled armored formations and grounded much of the Luftwaffe. Factories still produced weapons, but increasingly they lacked the raw materials, electricity, and transport needed to deliver them where they were required. Germany remained capable of fierce resistance, yet the resources necessary to sustain prolonged war were disappearing. Heinrich Himmler was acutely aware of this reality. In addition to leading the SS, he had been appointed commander of Army Group Vistula in January 1945, despite possessing little practical experience directing large military formations. The appointment reflected Hitler's growing reliance on political loyalty rather than professional military judgment. The results were disappointing. Attempts to halt the Soviet advance achieved only limited success, and experienced officers privately questioned Himmler's ability to command armies under such extreme conditions. Within weeks, he was replaced by General Gotthard Heinrici, one of the Wehrmacht's more capable defensive commanders. By this stage, the inner circle of the Nazi regime was beginning to fracture. Hermann Göring sought to clarify his constitutional position should Hitler become incapable of governing. Martin Bormann worked tirelessly to preserve his own influence within the bunker. Joseph Goebbels remained fiercely loyal, insisting that surrender was unthinkable. Amid these competing ambitions, Himmler began exploring possibilities that only months earlier would have been considered unimaginable. The opportunity appeared through Count Folke Bernadotte of Sweden, Vice President of the Swedish Red Cross. Bernadotte had already negotiated with German authorities to secure the release of prisoners from concentration camps during the final months of the war, an operation that became known as the White Buses Mission. Thousands of Scandinavian prisoners and later prisoners of other nationalities were transported to safety in neutral Sweden. These humanitarian efforts brought Bernadotte into contact with senior SS officials, including Himmler himself. According to surviving records, Himmler believed that Germany might still avoid complete destruction by reaching a separate peace with Britain and the United States, while continuing resistance against the Soviet Union. Historians continue to debate how realistic he considered this proposal. Some argue that he fundamentally misunderstood Allied policy. Others suggest he was attempting primarily to preserve his own position in anticipation of Germany's defeat. There is no surviving evidence that the Western Allies ever regarded his proposals as a serious basis for negotiation. The obstacle was one of policy rather than diplomacy. Since the Casablanca Conference in 1943, the Allied powers had publicly committed themselves to demanding Germany's unconditional surrender. British Prime Minister Winston Churchill, United States President Franklin D. Roosevelt, and later President Harry S. Truman, together with Soviet leader Joseph Stalin, had repeatedly affirmed that no separate peace agreements would be accepted. The Grand Alliance was far from free of internal tensions, yet its leaders understood that negotiating independently with senior Nazi figures risked undermining both military strategy and political trust. Nevertheless, Himmler pressed ahead. On April 23, 1945, during meetings with Bernadotte near Lübeck, he declared that Hitler was close to death, although this was untrue, and suggested that he himself could assume leadership of Germany. He indicated a willingness to surrender to Britain and the United States, while hoping they would join Germany in resisting Soviet expansion. Bernadotte reported these conversations to Allied authorities. The message rapidly reached London and Washington. The response was immediate. There would be no negotiations. News of Himmler's approach soon became public through international broadcasts. On April 28th, the BBC reported that the Reichsführer SS had offered Germany's surrender to the Western Allies. Deep beneath Berlin, Adolf Hitler listened as confirmation arrived from multiple sources. According to eyewitness accounts preserved after the war, the reaction was explosive. Here was the man entrusted with the SS, the police apparatus, and vast areas of internal security, apparently acting without authorization, at the very moment when Hitler demanded absolute loyalty above all else. If you're enjoying this journey through history, subscribing genuinely helps us continue bringing remarkable true stories like this to the channel. The interruption is brief, almost unnoticed against the relentless pace of events, because history itself allows little pause. Inside the Führer bunker, Hitler immediately stripped Himmler of all his offices and declared him a traitor. Orders were issued for his arrest if he could be found. Hermann Fegelein, an SS general and Himmler's liaison officer in Berlin, was accused of attempting to abandon the bunker and was executed after a summary proceeding. Historians continue to debate the precise circumstances surrounding Fegelein's final hours, but his death reflected the atmosphere of paranoia consuming Hitler's headquarters. The irony was profound. For years, Heinrich Himmler had demanded unquestioning obedience from others. He had overseen an organization built upon discipline, surveillance, and ideological conformity. Yet, as the Third Reich collapsed, he reached the same conclusion that many German officers had recognized months earlier: the war could not be won. Whether motivated by pragmatism, self-preservation, or a genuine belief that he could still shape Germany's future, his attempt to negotiate marked the complete collapse of the personal trust upon which his extraordinary power had depended. Outside the bunker, however, events moved beyond the control of either man. Soviet artillery continued to close in. Berlin was becoming a battlefield of shattered streets, burning buildings, and exhausted defenders. The final act of the Third Reich was no longer being written by grand strategy, but by desperation, isolation, and the irreversible consequences of decisions made over the preceding 12 years. As Berlin fell into silence, broken only by artillery and collapsing masonry, the drama unfolding inside the Führer bunker represented more than the end of a dictatorship. It marked the collapse of an entire system of power that had depended upon personal loyalty above institutional stability. Hitler had surrounded himself with competing subordinates, encouraging rivalry while reserving final authority for himself alone. That system functioned only so long as victory appeared possible. Once defeat became inevitable, ambition, fear, and self-preservation rapidly replaced unquestioning obedience. Himmler's failed negotiations were perhaps the clearest demonstration that even the regime's most trusted figures no longer believed its survival was possible. Compared with equivalent organizations in other major powers, the SS stood apart not because it was simply another elite military force, but because it combined military, intelligence, policing, and ideological functions under a single leadership. Britain's Special Air Service remained a comparatively small special operations unit focused on reconnaissance and raids. The American Office of Strategic Services concentrated on espionage and resistance support rather than domestic policing. The Soviet NKVD exercised enormous internal security powers and commanded substantial military formations, making it the closest institutional comparison in terms of authority, although it developed within a very different political system and wartime doctrine. Japan's Kempeitai likewise combined military policing with intelligence responsibilities, but it never reached the organizational scale or administrative complexity achieved by the SS. The Waffen-SS itself also differed from many contemporary military formations. Elite divisions equipped with Panther and Tiger tanks often matched the Wehrmacht's best units in firepower, while some formations demonstrated considerable tactical skill during defensive operations. Yet battlefield performance varied enormously. Several divisions raised late in the war suffered from inadequate training, shortages of experienced officers, and limited equipment. By contrast, the regular German army generally retained stronger professional military traditions, even as it faced overwhelming material disadvantages during the final campaigns. Production figures further illustrate these contrasts. Germany manufactured roughly 6,000 Panther tanks and about 1,350 Tiger I and Tiger II tanks during the war. Impressive engineering achievements, but modest, compared with the Soviet Union's production of more than 57,000 T-34s, or the United States manufacture of nearly 50,000 Sherman tanks. Industrial capacity, not merely technical sophistication, increasingly determined success. Himmler's belief that Britain and the United States might join Germany against the Soviet Union reflected a profound misunderstanding of Allied strategy. By April 1945, the Western Allies had invested years of military cooperation with Moscow, despite growing political differences. Separate negotiations with one of the principal architects of the Nazi regime would have shattered Allied unity at the very moment victory was within reach. The proposal was therefore rejected not only because of who Himmler was, but because it fundamentally contradicted Allied policy. The immediate consequences were swift. On April 30th, 1945, 2 days after learning of Himmler's secret approach, Adolf Hitler died by suicide in the Führer bunker alongside Eva Braun, whom he had married only the previous day. In his political testament, Hitler formally expelled Himmler from the Nazi Party and removed him from all state offices, replacing him as Reichsführer SS with Karl Hanke. The appointment proved largely symbolic. Germany's military collapse was already irreversible, and many SS units were either surrendering independently or attempting to escape advancing Allied forces. Himmler himself entered the final weeks of the war in a state of uncertainty. No longer trusted by Hitler, rejected by the Western Allies, and confronted by Germany's unconditional surrender on May 8, 1945, he attempted to disappear. Disguised in the uniform of a non-commissioned military policeman and carrying forged identity papers under the name Heinrich Hitzinger, he traveled through northern Germany, hoping to evade detection. The disguise failed. On May 21, 1945, British troops detained him near Bremervörde after inconsistencies in his documents aroused suspicion. During a subsequent medical examination on May 23rd, he bit into a concealed cyanide capsule. Despite immediate efforts to save him, he died within minutes. There was no dramatic trial, no lengthy public defense, and no opportunity to explain his decisions before an international court. His death deprived historians of testimony that might have clarified many remaining questions, although the extensive documentary record left behind by the Nazi state continues to provide overwhelming evidence of the SS's central role in its crimes. The legacy of Heinrich Himmler survives not in monuments celebrating achievement, but in places dedicated to remembrance and historical accountability. Former concentration camps such as Dachau, Auschwitz-Birkenau, and Sachsenhausen have been preserved as memorials and museums where original buildings, documents, and personal belongings confront visitors with the human consequences of policies administered under his authority. Archives across Germany, Poland, Britain, the United States, and many other countries continue to examine surviving SS records, transport lists, photographs, and correspondence. Historians still debate aspects of decision-making within the Nazi hierarchy, yet there is broad scholarly consensus regarding Himmler's responsibility as one of the principal organizers of the regime's machinery of persecution and genocide. And so the story returns to that underground bunker beneath Berlin on the evening of April 28, 1945. The dust still falls from cracked ceilings. The distant thunder of Soviet artillery still echoes through reinforced concrete. Maps still cover tables, though they no longer describe reality. In those final hours, Adolf Hitler believed he had been abandoned by the one man whose loyalty had seemed beyond question. The betrayal he perceived was not the cause of Germany's defeat. That outcome had already been shaped by years of military overreach, economic exhaustion, and the combined strength of the Allied powers. Yet emotionally, it represented the final fracture within a regime built upon absolute personal allegiance. The irony is impossible to ignore. Heinrich Himmler spent years constructing one of history's most disciplined bureaucracies, demanding obedience from millions while enforcing a system that tolerated no dissent. In the end, when confronted by unavoidable defeat, he acted independently in pursuit of a solution that he believed might preserve something from the ruins. Whether that decision arose from desperation, calculation, or self-preservation remains a subject of historical discussion. What is certain is that it destroyed the confidence of the man who had elevated him to extraordinary power. History often remembers the thunder of armies, the roar of tanks, and the destruction of cities. Yet sometimes it turns upon quieter moments: a confidential meeting in neutral territory, a message carried across borders, a radio broadcast reaching a bunker beneath a dying capital. In those seemingly ordinary moments, decades of ambition, loyalty, and violence can unravel with astonishing speed. The smoke over Berlin eventually drifted away. The guns fell silent. The banners that had once dominated Europe disappeared from its capitals. What remained were documents, ruins, memorials, and millions of lives forever marked by the decisions of men who believed their power would endure indefinitely. The final betrayal was not merely the collapse of one man's loyalty to another. It was the moment an entire system discovered that fear could command obedience, ideology could inspire fanaticism, and power could build empires. But none of them could prevent the truth from arriving in the end.